I thought the De'Aaron Fox trade stuff was going to go away when the Kings started winning.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still just kind of out there. And I want to get into I want to talk about the De'Aaron Fox trade stuff in a couple of different layers. And the first one is, why do you think this keeps coming up?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, I mean, clearly we're getting closer to the deadline. So a lot of websites like to do or a lot of shows like to do the whole, what's going to happen. Let's start predicting like who's available.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people are just like right away going to say, well, De'Aaron Fox is probably available because his agent is Rich Paul and is going to push and try to get him out. I don't think anything is going to happen right now. Like between now and February 6th, February 8th, even if De'Aaron Fox went to the Kings right now and said, hey, I want out now, I don't think it's going to happen. Because this summer there will be more available to trade, and he will still have a year left, and he will still be a max extension eligible player if he gets traded this summer.
Right.
So my first instinct is like there's a lot of noise, but there's a lot of noise because somebody wants to put a picture of De'Aaron Fox on the front of their like 5 trades that could go down this summer. They could go down between now and February 6th.
Right. He's the as a blogger. Let me tell you, if there's a player you think is going to get engagement for your website, you're going to include that player in headlines, in trades, in graphics, whatever you need to do.
Yep.
And when you start talking stars who are available, he's the only like all NBA level player, all-star level player who's not over 30.
Well, he's not 35.
Right. Who's not Jimmy Butler. Cam Johnson's almost 30, but Cam Johnson, not an all-star, not an all-NBA guy.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty rare that players as good as De'Aaron Fox might possibly be available. So when you're trying to write at an NBA website, you're not going to be like, Cam Johnson and Denny Avdia and just
even the Kyle Kuzma stuff.
Kyle Kuzma, Robert Williams. Like, okay, those are names that might come up, but De'Aaron Fox. So I do think you're right. I think that's part of the reason, because it was the Mike Brown stuff happens. They lose a bunch of games.
Yep.
De'Aaron Fox goes on a bunch of podcasts, or at least on one podcast. Rich Paul meets with the Kings.
Then they lost a bunch more games.
Yep. Then Mike Brown gets fired, and then it somehow gets into the ether that it's De'Aaron Fox's fault that Mike Brown got fired.
Even though it's not.
And it right. And it looks like the sky is falling, and it was like, obviously they're going to move him. And maybe if they were 1-7 under Doug, maybe that'd be the case. Maybe he would say, like, I want out right now. I'm not wasting a full year here. I want out now. Maybe, but they're 7-1.
Even if he says that, though, it's still as a franchise, it's on you to do what's best for the franchise.
Yeah.
And what's best for the franchise. This is why, we always hear the rumors of like where he could go, right? And like the team that I'm going to keep centering all of my thoughts on is the Houston Rockets.
More on that in a bit. Go on.
Yeah, but that's the team. And the Houston Rockets, you get to this summer, they have more available than they have available today. So first of all, as soon as you get to July 1st, like if you wait until July 1st, now you have an extra draft pick. So now we're not talking about the 2025 through the 2031 draft. Now you're talking about the 32 draft as well. So every team gets that access to another draft pick. But more than that, a team like the Rockets extended a player like Jalen Green. And now I think you can trade him, but to trade him, it's so incredibly complex because he's a base year compensation player, which used to be a big thing that people talked about, and it's not anymore. So he's still playing out the final year of his rookie scale contract, but he's about to start a new contract, right? So you don't just get to trade for the cheap contract. You have to trade for a combination of the contract.
This was like when the Warriors traded Jordan Poole. And his extension hadn't kicked in yet.
Exactly. Okay. So what happened is you have to take back more than you send out. And then because the Kings are up against the luxury tax and they're hard capped at the first apron, you're not able to work a deal in which you could possibly bring him in.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, I think that this summer there will be more discussions. Whether the Kings win or not is going to play a lot into this, and I think that's what the Kings are faced with right now. How do we win enough games so De'Aaron Fox doesn't ask out? How do we make this the place that he wants to sign the extension?
Mm-hmm.
And so far, they're doing it. They didn't do it through the first 31 games. And I'm not throwing shade at Mike. I don't put all the blame on this situation where the Kings are at right now on Mike.
Sure.
The fact that Doug stepped in and this team has taken a huge leap forward, it's a different voice in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different, atmosphere. Like,
Mm-hmm.
certain players are playing better, certain players aren't. It is just like this happens. Like the dynamic changed,
sure,
and it's worked out. But at the same time, that first 31 games, it got dark.
It was bad.
Yeah, and not only that, but it was dark through like the first 25.
Mm-hmm.
And then we start having these conversations of 24 games in is when they start having the conversations with Rich Paul coming in and saying, hey,
Mm-hmm.
we need to get more talent here. What's
Mm-hmm.
going on? And then the team just hits the skids. So like, I'm not going to blame Rich Paul in that conversation for where the Kings went after that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also going to say, like, a lot was happening. A lot of negative was happening.
Mm-hmm.
The Kings needed to make a trade.
Yeah.
Maybe Mike needed to be fired. And all of these things were happening at the same time. And at the end of the day, like, look, everything I've heard, De'Aaron Fox had nothing to do with anything that happened with Mike.
It wouldn't make sense.
No, he's always been a Mike guy, and he's always liked to be coached hard. But at the same time, it's the appearance of it, and it's the way that people who don't understand what's going on outside of Sacramento portray it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, look, if De'Aaron wants to start over and a reset button, I would understand it. I mean, you've been here 8 years and you haven't won.
Mm-hmm.
But I also look at this season and say, okay, why not here? Like, why is any situation guaranteed to be better than the one that's here?
Sure.
And it's a tough thing to deal with.
There's so much to this, but the other side of this is the Kings side, and I don't think anybody's in a rush. No team is in a rush to trade their best player.
No,
even that's just not a thing that happens.
Mm-mm.
Forget the on-court stuff. Forget the fact that just replacing De'Aaron Fox is hard. You can get into like what you said. Any trade that gets made has to benefit the team.
Yeah,
and so it's like, okay, so you're just gonna make this trade. Let's the Kings facilitate this. It's not De'Aaron Fox. The Kings say, hey, we got a call, and the call. You're not just gonna give them away. You're gonna need to. It would need to be a deal, and we'll talk about what a deal might look like. But it would need to be a deal where, if the Shams Charania tweet came up right now, Kings traded De'Aaron Fox, that we would have to go, oh my God, yes, you have to pull the trigger on that trade. That is a deal that has to be made because they just offered the moon, the sun, and the stars, and the next galaxy over. Don't even know what it's called. It's like, yeah, you know what, but that's not how trades work. So I when trying to get to the core of why it keeps coming up, I guess because it's going to linger as long as he doesn't sign an extension. But I also think that now that they're 7-1 in their last 8, and yeah, he was out for some of those games, but I think it to me cools that idea some, because now all of a sudden they are winning. Now all of a sudden the path doesn't seem like, dude, they need a dramatic trade. Now it looks like, hey, tossing a Cam Johnson into the mix here might actually help a lot. Where now you go from, okay, yeah, hey, maybe they make the playoffs, to, hey, this is a really high quality top 5 seed, and they're going to be favored in the first round, and they're going to have a really tough second round series, or give a really tough second round series.
Yeah.
So I know it's going to keep coming up as long as he doesn't have his extension. But I think in reality, I would imagine anything that was actually percolating is probably not doing so anymore, given their success.
Yeah, and I would also like to clarify, people should know that the reason why, it doesn't make any sense for De'Aaron Fox to sign an extension when there's potential for way more money if you're All-NBA. If he has a great season, he's only missed 3 games on the season. If he has a great season and he's having a career year and the team wins, there is definitely potential. We already talked about it. All the guys that have already dropped off the All-NBA roster who have already hit the threshold that they can't play 65 games.
Because remember, it's just 1 to 15 now. There's no positions.
Yeah, I mean, Luka Doncic is, if I'm not mistaken, is no longer eligible to be an All-NBA player. Joel Embiid is not eligible to be an All-NBA player. Paul George is like very much on the bubble about being an All-NBA player. There are a lot of slots that are opening up because players just aren't going to get there. So again, the reason why he initially wasn't signing an extension partially was to say, hey, look, I want you to prove that we're going to be a winning organization. Yeah. We took a step back last year. We had a great season. We took a little bit of a step back, and I want to see where it goes. Then it didn't go very well at all. And so it becomes more and more of like, oh, he didn't sign the extension. Right. Well, at the end of the day, if he gets a Supermax, the Kings can pay him more than anyone else.
Right.
That's just it. That's it. That long in the end of that's the story.
That is what it comes down to.
Yeah. And so I would hope that that he at least gives them an opportunity here to show that this is where they should be heading, and this is a place he would like to stay. And I know that's weird to have a place like 8 years in that you're like, okay, I don't know if I want to stay there or not.
Sure.
But
it's been a weird 8 years.
It's just it's been it was a horrible first 6.
Sure.
So like, or first 5 years. Like, yeah, it wasn't fun. Like, losing isn't fun.
Here's one thing I want to get to real quick. Does it here? This is the question we'll answer when we come back.
Okay.
Does it feel to you like he is on? How do I want to phrase this? Not he's on the outside of what's happening with the Kings, and maybe it's just because he was out for those couple of games. But I feel like I watched Malik Monk interact with Doug Christie, and I watched Domantas Sabonis interact with Doug Christie. And it feels like there's a different connection there than with De'Aaron. And I want to know if you feel that way too, or if it's just me being dramatic, which I'm fully open to. We'll talk about that next. But before we